Sorry, Chair, do you want me to respond to questions as they come up or do it at the end?
I think it's best if we do it at the end.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that clarity. I'll proceed. So on disability, I think it's recorded that there's been some increase in the numbers we are reporting in the last 3 years. However, bringing back to my earlier point, we still don't have the information for the whole workforce. Ethnicity, like a number of other factors here, has remained stable over the period. And for some context, population estimates from ONS indicate that 1.9% of our residents are from an ethnic minority background. Moving on to age, lots of breakdown there for you of the age profile across the council, including our schools, of course. And there has been an increase in age for those employees, those individuals we employ over the age of 60, and I think that's increased in each of the last 3 years. Again, I think that is consistent in terms of workforce profiles in other local authorities. Moving down then to carer responsibility, sexual orientation, there was nothing. Obviously, we've got relatively low report in there, but nothing significant to note. For caring responsibilities, it looks as if that's decreased slightly. Now we know for caring, for those of us who are carers, people become carers at different points of their lives. So not quite sure what's happening there, whether people are maintaining that information. We do know, however, through the staff survey that we undertook earlier this year, that 20% of the staff who responded to that survey, which is around 350 employees, indicated at that time that they did have caring responsibility. Final section in the appendix is about Welsh language skills within our workforce. As you probably know from previous reporting, we collate this in terms of the abilities with regard to Welsh speaking, Welsh reading and writing. And there has been an increase there in those people falling into the little category. I think is probably ranging between 1 to 2% increase on the previous year. So if I can take you now back to the main report, where we can move on to look at Welsh language skills, but specifically in relation to recruitment. I believe this was a subject matter discussed at last committee meeting. So in the report, I've outlined that our recruitment procedure does include a requirement for managers to assess whether Welsh language skills apply to a vacant post at that time. In doing so, consideration needs to be given to the role, the expectations of that role, but obviously the wider team in terms of their ability to deliver the service as required through the medium of Welsh language, as that applies to that particular service area. In paragraph 4.2.4, you'll note that I've mentioned the current policy on using Welsh language in the workplace. What we agreed within that policy is that all posts, if they weren't deemed as essential, Welsh language skills being essential, they would be advertised as desirable. That is a position that we have, however, been reviewing. And meanwhile, as I go on in the next paragraph to mention, the Welsh Language Commissioner also decided to look at some recruitment in Bridgend in compiling their 1920 monitoring work. At that time, they identified some gaps in recruitment material. I think everything was as it should have been in terms of essential Welsh language skills. But because of our approach, saying all other posts are Welsh language skills are desirable, there was some concern, I suppose, identified because we hadn't been clear and specific in our recruitment documentation as to what those skills might be and what the duties might be. So that is something that we're currently updating in order to provide and to make some recommendations in relation to that policy, to make it easier for managers to both assess the language skills and also for us to provide clarity to our applicants. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Deb. Before I bring Councillor Baldwin in, I'd just like to remind members that if you do have a comment or a query, if you could just indicate that you'd like to come in on the discussion in the instant messenger box, and I'll bring you in. I know that I've picked up with you in terms of reporting, and I think you alluded to it in your opening remarks about the kind of binary position of our reporting, and I'd just like to reassure members, if you were looking at the reporting data, this is based on the previous strategic equality plan, and going forward we have decided that it is kind of a little bit dated. The terms that are used aren't the terms of the modern day, and so we are looking at putting in a different kind of reporting system going forward. Councillor Baldwin, I don't know if you want to ask your question now.
I do, thank you, Chair. And I totally accept the fact that a document, when written, is a document of its time, and to change every language as it evolves in there could be an industry in itself, never mind actually delivering the work that's required on it. And I do want to say how impressed I am with the progress that we are making within Bridgend. If I could take you to 4.2.2 within the report, it talks about the extent of the assessment of whether it's essential in relation to the extent of the contact that that individual has with Welsh speakers. And I think to try and look at it from a strategic level of Welsh speaking, it almost seems at odds with the Welsh speaking population within our community, which we know is increasing, but the likely extent of an individual in a front-facing or other role interacting with a Welsh speaker on a day-to-day basis isn't likely to be at that level where maybe managers would consider it to be essential. However, that puts it at odds with the fact that we as an organisation want to increase the amount of Welsh speakers that we have in our service delivery, and therefore then reduce the amount of complaints that we would have from the Welsh Language Commissioner in relation to the delivery of services. So how, and I noticed you said that there was some other work that was going on, how are we going to, because if that was the case, then maybe all reception facing staff should be Welsh speaking, but how are we going to be able to improve our Welsh speaking officers while also and satisfy the Welsh Language Commissioner, while our Welsh speaking community may not be increasing at the rate that we expect our staff to speak Welsh? Does that make sense, Deb?
It does make sense.
Yes.
Deb's got a plan.
Thanks, Councillor Baldwin. 2 points really. I think we need to make it easier for managers to go through that assessment and to be thinking, as you've said, quite broadly in terms of how we not only deliver the service for that area, but also try to improve Welsh language speakers. You referenced customer services, which is an obvious, a very, very good example of an area where we need to ensure that we have sufficient Welsh speakers within the team. And we've done a piece of work in HR, in our learning and development team, to do a more detailed training needs analysis against the requirements of that service. So our aspiration is to grow that across the organisation, but the place to start, we felt, were our most front-facing services. So they have a more detailed training plan whereby it's set out quite clearly what the expectations of those teams are, but also the skills profile of the workers within that service. So for them, when they come to recruitment, it should be even easier to identify those specific posts where the skills are needed. Sorry, we've also picked that up in some other front-facing areas as well. I think Tremor Moor, Bridgend Day Services are ones that come to mind.
And obviously, while we recognise that Welsh is an important or as an equal language, we also have, we need to make sure that we're not discriminating against people who don't speak Welsh, but also how we can actually be more inclusive in relation to other European and world languages that are being spoken in Bridgend. So it is just a more growing and complex situation for us all the time. The other point that I have is on point 5 of the appendix, which talks about the sexual orientation. And adding up all of the bisexual, gay and lesbian members of staff comes to about 1.5% of our staff, which compared to ethnicity at 1.8%, I think it demonstrates the way that we have to go. I recognise that this isn't a mandatory requirement of staff to be able to identify their sexuality. However, it just, I think, shows the distance that we still have to travel. And I know we're doing an awful lot of work on it in relation to raising awareness on LGBT month and attending Pride and all of these different things. But if we still in Bridgend have a lower percentage of people that are identifying as their sexual orientation as non-heterosexual at a lower level than ethnicity, it worries me a little. And also that we have nothing noted in that point 5 on transgender. And that's all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Go on, Deb, did you want to say something?
Yes, I note your points and concern, and I've been in discussion with Nick Bunsen, Equalities Officer, to look to see the actions that we can take to try to improve that position in the coming years over the lifetime, as Councillor Patel has said, of the SEP. Now we're in the new format. There is lots of really good work, as mentioned, going on there in relation to Pride, etc. And perhaps we should be taking those opportunities when we're promoting those positive things to ask people and to remind people that it's very important for us to receive that data, and why it's helpful for us to have a proper understanding of our workforce to ensure that we can respond accordingly. So yes, some more work needed there. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. Councillor Howells has a question for you.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Deborah, for that comprehensive report. You know, it's very interesting. I want to come back on the Welsh language thing. I think probably as one of the few Welsh language speaking councillors, I seem to be the person that Welsh speakers come to complain about things with the council. The reality of the situation is the council cannot provide Welsh language services in all areas, but I think the fundamental thing for the council that needs to ensure is that there is a Welsh language speaker when somebody phones in. And secondly, we need to have a Welsh language speaker on reception, in the main reception, and probably not just wearing a lanyard to say they're a Welsh speaker, but probably a little sign to say that they are Welsh speakers, so that a Welsh speaker comes in and they can directly see there is a Welsh speaker there. Now, I'm not saying you're going to be able to do that all the time, but I think it demonstrates an intent on doing that. And the other issue about recruitment, I think that the idea of having down that speaking Welsh is desirable, I think that's good. We don't have to say in a large number of posts that it is compulsory or essential, but I think that desirable is a sensible thing to have, and it's made clear that once it's desirable, it isn't essential, so that we're not discouraging non-Welsh speakers from applying for the post, because at the end of the day, my argument is you pick the best person for the job. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Councillor Howells. I don't know if you've got any comments on that, Deb, or if I should go on to Councillor Venables.
I'm happy to pass the comments on to the service area, and we'll take the comments on board in terms of looking at the new categories for Welsh skills. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Venables, would you like to come in and ask your question, please?
Hi, yeah. I just wanted to ask about the gender disparity and the the big difference between males and females. And I was just wondering if it was possible to look at the sort of the gender differences at different levels of officer. So, is there a difference between managers? Is it the same difference, or is it that we have more females working in, I don't know, lower paid jobs or lower level jobs? Just something like that. Just in the future, if we could look at something, perhaps.
Yeah, I think we do have that information, don't we, Deb? And I'm pretty sure it's been to this committee before, but maybe it was a little while ago. And so, we can look at bringing that forward in the next meeting if that works.
Yeah, that information is available, and we regularly collect that. That's no problem at all. And just to comment on it, we've got, it's a real mix across the organisation. If you look at our senior management team, there's a strong proportion there of female workers, but equally at our very lowest levels in the organisation, that there are a high number of females there as well. So, but yes, that information is available.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venables. Councillor Radcliffe, would you like to come in and ask your question, please?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just a quick question on the discrepancy on the data you have on carers between this survey and the corporate survey. And that is, we know a lot of people who are carers don't actually identify as carers, and it's very much the way you word the question and so forth. So I'm just wondering whether there's a proactive approach within the organisation to help people identify themselves as carers, because I think this year, in particular with the changes to how everyone works, I think it is important that people who are carers can have the support they have to carry on working and fulfil their caring responsibilities at the same time.
Yes, absolutely, Councillor. I agree with everything you're saying there. This year, when we did the staff survey, we just asked one single question on carers with a view to elaborate that in future years. So, but clearly that was a good source of information in terms of the response rate that we had from there. So that suggested to me that the language we were using was good. But again, it's about reminding staff to update their details and provide this information. But this year, again, referring back to the SEP, we are undertaking some specific work around carers. I believe we've got some good policies and procedures in place that can help to support carers. But I think to have that in one place rather than people having to go in various places looking for information would be of benefit. So we're planning to bring that forward during this year, and obviously would be updating this committee as well.
Great, thanks, Deb. The leader would like to come in whenever he's ready.
Yeah, sorry, apologies. Thanks.
Mute.
Yeah, I was on mute. I keep doing it even after 5 months of using Skype and Teams. My question, and apologies if I missed it in the report and it's been picked up already, was around the monitoring of the new recruits to the organisation, because to a large extent, we can't do much about our existing workforce, can we, in terms of people who are already employed by the organisation? We want the workforce to reflect our communities, but our workforce, Deborah, is very stable, isn't it?
Yes.
Most of our workforce probably were here and part of the organisation 10 years ago, and yet the communities are changing quite rapidly. So I'm interested in knowing about how our new recruits, and I know we're taking steps to try and reflect that as much as we can across all the different groups, trying to reflect that in new recruitments to the organisation. But if we can quantify that, then that would be helpful in understanding how successful we are being in controlling what and impacting on what we can make a difference, because we're not going to change the majority of our workforce, are we?
Okay, thanks, Lida. I think in terms of capturing information, I know your comments were wider than that, but in terms of capturing information, when we have new recruits, that is the more successful area of us gathering information, because it is part of the recruitment process. And if people choose not to respond to some of the questions, they do have an option of prefer not to say. So I think at some point it may be useful for us to reflect on that as well. So we've got a fuller data set of information. Equally, I go back again to the SEP, but we have plans for this year to try to broaden our scope in terms of recruitment to ensure that we are trying to attract the most diverse workforce that we possibly can.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. And I'm also mindful of the age demographic of our workforce as well. So we do have an ageing workforce. So I'm sure that'll be picked up in terms of recruitment as well going forward. I can't see any other members have indicated that they'd like to come in on this discussion. So if nobody else would like to come in, can I ask a cabinet member to move the report, please?
Move.
Second.
Seconded.
Thank you. And is everyone okay to note the contents of the report? Yep. I'll take silence as a yes.
Noted.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item, thanks Deb, by the way, it was a really good report. And if you'd like to stay, you can. Item 5 is the Equalities work support by Wellbeing Service. I know Andrew Thomas is going to present the report, but I think Jackie's here as well. So do you want to come in on the start of this report? Is that right, Jackie?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Patel. I just thought I'd give some context really to the service, and then Andrew will go through the detail if that's okay, Chair. So prior to the Prevention and Wellbeing Service being part of, Andrew being placed within social services, he was part of the sports and physical activity team. So with the introduction of the Act, and members will be aware about the change journey that we've been on in terms of social services. He came under the social services sort of service, and back in 2017 we did a restructure of that element and hence created the Prevention and Wellbeing Service. So it's quite a unique service within the council. So whilst situated within the Social Services and Wellbeing Directorate, it is a cross-cutting service across the council, and more significantly, the significant part of the work that it does works alongside key partners across the whole of the borough. So the Prevention and Wellbeing Service, as you can see in the report, really has grown into a diverse range of services over the 3 years. And it's almost unrecognisable to what you see in, 3.2 of the report, really. So we now have quite a diverse programme that supports those vulnerable people in our community. But what we have is targeted programmes to support health and well-being of the needs of our communities. And we've got, and we engage with those with protective characteristics. So the whole service, I must say, continues to show creativity and innovation, and no more so in the last 6 months, really, and at all levels. But it's driven by an ethos about connecting places and connecting, and having person-centred services together and putting people and places together to achieve, amazing results, really. So I hope that you've had an opportunity really to look at some of the clips that are included on the appendix. For instance, the wonderful world and the cultural Olympiage, some of these are really thought-provoking, and, the same as me, the Discovery Days for Children. There's quite a rich array of information in terms of those clips, really. So I think with no further ado, I'll just hand over to Andrew to go through some of the details, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to, share progress on the projects and activities that not just my service area, but the partners that we're working with have managed to take forward. I think for the first time in my career, I feel the need to apologise for being less statistical. I think we've tried to bring information on the how and the why some of these projects and programs are being developed, as opposed to the what and the where. Although there are some statistics included within there that perhaps show the scale and volume of some of the programs and how they are growing and impacting. So I think, as Jackie indicates, it is a small service with small teams, but it's got a common ingredient of working with partnerships, developing learning, supporting our networks, I think, and then developing community ownership of these things are created. I'm keen to reflect on, when preparing this report, that the section on Wellbeing of Future Generations Act comes towards the tail end of the report, but it's pretty integral to the way and the philosophy that this service area is trying to work. So those 5 ways of working, I think, are pretty important, and I think I'm describing how we're trying to target working with people to manage their physical and mental well-being in their communities, looking at integrated approaches where you have good awareness of how your actions as an organisation interface with the actions and objectives of other organisations. I'm hopeful that the report and the case studies and the digital stories can show how we're trying to collaborate across sectors, and also to use the word co-production, which is a very well used phrase. But I think it's something that we try to use as an approach where basically we listen to partners, we design the way forward with those partners, engage, test and improve those things for the benefit of the people of Bridgend. So those things are in there. And stakeholder ownership, I think our long game is that the people that we work with, the networks, the partners, the organisations, really see value in some of the things that are built up over a period of time and take ownership of those kinds of things. So I think, as Jackie indicates, we've shared 7 appendices, which are case studies from a larger in-service report, because we try to get staff across the teams being diverse to understand how each of their areas of service can connect to each other. If there is an interest from panel members, I'm more than happy to circulate that, as it may present a fuller story of how each of the various parts delivers. And I think within the report shared some narrative on the work we're doing with young people. So our Voice project, looking at gender equality and capturing young people's voices, some stories how we're trying to increase physical and mental well-being in schools environments. I picked up on the Welsh language comments in the previous discussion. We work in partnership with the EARS, and we part fund a development officer and an apprentice annually to develop more Welsh medium opportunities in school, after school, in the community. And also we do quite a lot in developing confidence and capability in young people, helping them to achieve their potential through our active young people leadership model. And you'll probably see from the report we've tried to grow our inclusivity, if that is an actual word, and to reach people that need a modified approach and more mentoring, more support to work their way through that. Mentioned a few things around our work with the other end of the age spectrum, so how we connect and play a leadership role with the Ageing Well plan, developing age-friendly communities within Bridgend, working with the Older People's Forums, community groups and broader partners. Some examples then of things like the exercise referral scheme, which has been particularly successful in Bridgend. And I've touched within the report, but not shown any case study work, on how we going forward with Wales Cooperative and Digital Communities Wales, recognising that being digitally connected has grown in importance since April of this year for many older people, people with disabilities, people living in poverty, those kinds of things, to try and identify how we can develop cooperatives, particularly for carers in this context, which I think came up also in one of the previous previous items, discussions. Finally, I think that there's an item in there on play sufficiency, and members of this panel may not be aware that under the rights of the child, there is a duty in Wales for local authorities to support and secure, as opposed to provide, sufficient quality and quantity of play as part of a young person's development. So that area falls also underneath my service area. I think when we go through the type of work, you'll find that if we're looking at improving well-being, there is a universal need, and possibly that has grown over the period of lockdown, particularly with young people, of supporting, maintaining well-being, particularly mental well-being. So we have an approach where a rising tide will float all boats, to try and raise overall levels, but there's also a recognition that some boats will need more support to float. So there is some targeted work, as you can see within there, to make sure we can try to redress imbalances in population well-being. So I guess what I will touch on is the three areas that you've asked me to talk through in a little bit more detail, which would be the Girls Network, the work with the dementia support and dementia-friendly swimming, and possibly then the Olympic programme. The Girls Network started probably some years ago, recognising differentials in levels of physical activity, and with support from Sport Wales, the agenda was to get more girls more active more often. I think the reality of the scenario, the more we talked to girls, the more we understood from what girls were saying, and the more appetite we understood that girls had to solve their own solutions. There were other factors at play, and things like body image and confidence and self-esteem, and even friendship circles were more common barriers and probably more key ingredients for developing well-being. That programme has moved on. Its initial gains were around changing school policies on things like PE kits and giving girls more ownership of how investments were used and events were created. But we now have 6 secondary schools who are actively working with us with this programme. We've also piloted with 3 primaries, because we're recognising from feedback that some of the issues around self-esteem, body image are starting far lower down the age groups than perhaps we may have assumed. So we're taking work forward in that way. But essentially, if you've seen the film, girls are now being empowered, I suppose, to consult with their peers, to develop appropriate plans, to look at how they invest in improving overall well-being, and to capture their voices in terms of how lives could go forward for them. Scheme has been very, very successful. I looked earlier today on some of the earlier work, and there's a Facebook page from Girls Network Progen which shows where this started. The project has moved very much from being quite sport and physical activity orientated into a more holistic approach to young people's well-being. And I think, anticipating the question that this network is only focusing on girls, we have similar work now from our learning that is applied with boys also, or also mixed groups through a programme that we're calling Ascent, recognising that maintaining well-being is a challenge for all gender. So, you know, we could share a little bit more on that in due course. In terms of the dementia work, I think dementia-friendly swimming, and again, if you've seen that, the digital clip that we've included, that was part of our early pilot work. It's a good example of co-production, because if we've been honest, we were starting from a low base in knowledge and understanding. Worked with BAVO, worked with Alzheimer's Society, worked with social care professionals, Carers Centre, to try and understand what was required to make it a meaningful experience. Probably made a few mistakes. I think we assumed that every carer would want to swim with the person cared for, and suddenly realised we may actually need some volunteers to support with that. And I think the carers as part of the value they would gain, we're looking for some respite and opportunity to have conversations with other carers facing similar issues. So a social element to that activity developed, also involving our and our library services. So tying in with perhaps that story I tried describing at the beginning of working with stakeholders to own the issue, find the solutions, find long-term ways of things going forward. Currently supporting around 80 people, 40 carers, 40 people with living with dementia, getting supported in terms of those being referred into services from domiciliary care providers, from community, the community team, from BAVO, carer centres and those kinds of things. And if I'm being honest, that the message I took from the Digi story was people, regardless of circumstances, still looking for fun and engagement. I was less sure seeing a person living with dementia coming down a flume in a swimming pool until I saw them laugh at the end. But that's grown into a very positive experience. During lockdown, things become more difficult, but we've maintained telephone communication, issued newsletters, and planning for a digital platform and supporting carers and cared for to be able to engage for part of their well-being through those routes. A big lottery fund have come forward with an investment of £40,000 to try and make that aspiration a reality. And beyond the swimming programme, we've expanded to do activities in sports hall settings under our Feel Good for Life programme. So, but similarly, that social aspect remains as important. We've cautiously restarted some of that activity and monitoring. Participants report improvements in mood and recollection of what has gone on in the activities. Carers report positive experiences from being able to be in contact with the person being cared for, whereas perhaps people may have assumed it was respite. I think still keen to do positive things in a similar environment. And I guess to finish off on that section, in the first quarter of this year, the Feel Good for Life programme won the UK Active National Award for Physical Activity and Innovation in that context for breaking new ground. So there's still probably a long way to go and lots more people that we can support with these kinds of approaches and programmes. But there's been good progress in that respect. I'll move on to the third area that I was asked to speak about, which was the Olympage programme. Now, our Olympage programme been through a couple of phases. Our first phase, and bear in mind Olympage started as modified games, fun activities for older adults, vulnerable people in a range of settings. That started in a day services setting and involved us not only training our own team to be able to deliver those things, but also then to train staff from care backgrounds to help support or sustain those things in those settings. The appetite grew from there, and the learning disability team began operating their own Olympage programs as regular features in the calendar. And from their community, I think we've identified through our networks now of community groups working with the Older People's Forum, community navigators, local community coordinators. I think there are people on this call that joined us for our Olympage and Super Ages launch at Bridgend in December of last year, where we had 10 community teams, but we also had 2 coming from Rhondda, Cynnon and Merthyr that I'll explain in a short period of time. And one of the interesting aspects was Bridgend College, through their health and social care course, have supported us with up to 70 students to support the events leading up to the larger event and the event itself. And it shows a diversity, perhaps from moving beyond where we may have looked in the past in people studying sports and leisure, to look at those people that may have a legacy factor from this work in their future careers in the health and social care sector. So Building on a limpage, an opportunity arose from Public Health Wales, Welsh Government, through what they call the Healthy and Active Fund. I think Bridgen led a syndicate application to the three authorities, the third sector, BABO, Public Health Wales, and we secured £400,000 for a 3-year programme to try and identify how these kinds of approaches and programmes could empower older people to own their own things in their communities, and building from a pretty strong base. I think lockdown again emerged, and we've probably done quite a bit of work of providing home resources for people with telephone support. Digital is fine, but for a lot of the older people, we had to produce any activity programs on DVDs because that was the technology that they were working with at home. And we've also introduced a telephone mentoring program for a number of older people that we are trialing, and telephone surprisingly still has a huge impact on many older people's life, and they are happy to be supported and engaged through that mechanism. I think out of 5 older people we put into the first trial, 3 had age-acquired visual impairment. 1 had been fairly housebound. I think the lady had been encouraged to leave the house and have some exercise and walks. And I think the big gain for me is she's actually applied to have a guide dog because she wishes to engage more in life beyond the home. And I guess finally is that programme was successful in being chosen as a Bevan Exemplar project, which is one of the first few, I think, of non-health or social care projects that are being identified as a contribution to the long-term prevention agenda. I think that's me.
Andrew, I don't think there's enough words to say about how exciting that report was to read, and also the clips. I think they were really nice to watch, and I think they demonstrated the kind of broad spectrum of well-being really well. You know, we've got things like you mentioned, from the Girls Network to Olympage, to completely different age demographics, and I'm pleased to hear that, you know, you're working on rolling out the learning from different projects onto new schemes. As you mentioned, you know, we've taken learning from the Girls Network, now we're looking at working with boys, and I think that's really, like, you know, it's really pleasing. I think that's what ideal service should be doing. I know Councillor Burnett has indicated that she'd like to speak on this, but obviously if any other members have any comments, then if you'd like to indicate in the comment box and I'll bring you in. Councillor Burnett, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much, Andrew and Jackie, for introducing the service. I only got the papers for this just before the meeting because I'm just catching up on all my committees and everything, so I haven't had a look at the links, but I did come as the consort to the Mayor to the opening, to the Olympage and the launch of the Super Ages, and I was absolutely bowled over. That hall was just incredible. It really was an incredibly moving experience, and I still get regular feedback from older members of the community. It was a huge buzz for them, and you know, you can still have life-changing and significant moments no matter how old you are, and you know, you never lose your sense of humour, you never lose your sense of fun, and it's just, you know, I think this is some of the most exciting work that we're doing within the council, and it's certainly something that I'm very keen to become involved with as much as possible without stepping on your toes, Chair. But this is cross working, and also in my role as chair of Evergreen Hall, you know, we've had funding to produce wellbeing leaflets to send out to our members, and we've noticed that there really is need. We have to continue to speak to our older people in a format that they're comfortable with, without you know, we have to come down to their level, but also there is, people are never too old to learn, so it's that balance of introducing new technology but making them feel comfortable. And you use the word empowered, and I think that's really, really important. And I also really love the sort of intergenerational aspects of the work that you're doing, because I think there is a lost connection between the generations now, and older people have a valuable role to play in younger people's lives, and vice versa. So yeah, all I can say is well done, and I think it's fantastic.
Feeling a bit emotional on that, actually, because it's not easy, Steph, to explain that you don't really know where you want to take a project. So, but I think it's important to be honest with partners that you want to work with them to build a better thing. If there's one report I think that really touches me, or one digital story that's in the appendices, is the intergenerational one at Ogmo, when older people and younger people come together, and you see how much power that kind of dynamic can bring if it's set up properly.
I think that's one of my favourites as well, too.
I was there. It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was really, really nice to see how much the old people kind of, it plucked up some courage, because there were younger people there, and they were kind of looking to demonstrate that they hadn't quite lost it yet, and you know, they still had the skills to give them a bit of a run for their money. So it was really, really nice to be there. I don't know if any other members have any questions. I know Andrew gave a very comprehensive report. And I know that, I'm sure between myself and Councillor Burnett, we could talk about this all day. It's really, I don't know if anyone else, I think Councillor Stuart Baldwin would like to speak. And then Councillor Howells, if you'd like to come in, please, Stuart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And obviously, the one disappointment of being the long in May, but not quite long enough to be able to attend my second Olympage and Super Ages. As Nicole has already highlighted, it was a fantastic day. If I can be as fit and able as half of those people in the hall on that day, then I will be doing well. So it's just again to reinforce the thanks and gratitude that everybody else has highlighted. It is fantastic, and long may it continue. There was no question, Chair. I just wanted to say how good it was.
You know, you young people calling us old people old is not right, you know.
Well, Richard, in 3 years' time, or 2.5 years' time, I will officially be classed as an older person in Wales. So I fall into that category.
Yeah, so will I, 1 month ahead of him. So
Welcome to the club.
Well, we'll have to have a look at what we do for Olympage to ensure that it has things for you guys to play with. Gareth, would you like to come in and ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. And I'd just like to endorse the comments made about what a fantastic number of initiatives these are. And I think that as a councillor, I'm really proud of the staff on the council, the work they're doing to support people with these issues, and particularly what they're doing with the girls. And I know a number of, I've had family members with issues of dementia and friends and all that, and they said how supportive the service has been. So I'd just like to formally thank them on behalf of a lot of the people in the Llynby Valley. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Gareth. And I think that's in relation to the community coordinators as well. They do a fantastic job in all three valleys. The leader would like to come in.
Yeah, I'd echo all the positive comments that have been made. My question was around how we can further build on the work and extend and scale it up, because the need now has never been greater, in part because of the impact of the pandemic. So the question is around whether there are opportunities. I'm sure there are opportunities that we are looking at around scaling up some of these initiatives and supporting more people. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Leader. Sometimes it is about scaling up and sometimes it's about bespoke to each community. I don't know if Andrew wants to talk about some of the work that's been going on in relation to that. I know he mentioned about the kind of learning and growing. I would also like to ask, before you come back in, Andrew, about the work that's been going on during the pandemic. You know, this service hasn't stopped during the pandemic. I don't know if you want to cover it now or if you want to come back to the committee with a further report.
I'll try and answer the leaders bit, but I think some of the pandemic stuff, we're still reviewing the end of the first 2 quarters, and I think there's some pretty powerful things in there from certainly the cross-sector work we've been taking forward of how many people have actually benefited across the county, whether it's prescriptions or befriending or having basic maintenance to your garden that was concerning you then, or food parcel, or all of those other things. I think that there's two themes that have emerged, you know, having consulted with my team, or 3 themes, I suppose. One is very often the money it takes you to start some of these things. You don't always need the same amounts of money second time around if you've captured your learning properly. So I think gaining that learning and insight and pitfalls, you know, not everything is glorious. I think knowing what didn't work from those pilot programs is important. I think networks, you know, of trying to bring partners together. I think examples for me would be, I think you can write a book on how to establish a men's shed, but the best approaches I've seen is one men's shed from the Llinvi Valley supports another to be established elsewhere and shares their experiences. You might not follow it, you know, linear, because your circumstances may be different, but there's a bit of a reality to that, and it's pitched in a language that communities and understand. And I think the third thing that we've understood, and it came probably from the early part, whereas we would have probably visited schools and physically shared resources, I think we've been able to work with partners and to digitally try and centralise all of the tools and resources and information we've got, so they're there for people to use and work with as you know, as they're coming out of the oven, so to speak, as opposed to trying to roll it out physically across 40 locations. There may be something lost in the approach, but in the current climate, there's more to be gained from getting those ideas and those resources and those connections out there to people.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. It's about kind of sustainable delivery of services, isn't it? I don't know if anyone else would like to contribute. I think I've taken all the speakers I've indicated. And we welcome Councillor Gebby to the meeting. If there aren't any further speakers, then please could I have a Cabinet member move the report? And second?
Second.
Great, and I'm sure everyone's happy with that. So thank you very much, Andrew, for coming today, and I'm sure we'll have you back again in the near future. And you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, or you can leave. Up to you. Bye.
Thanks, Jay. I'll go as well. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jackie. Sorry. Okay, members, we're on to item 6, which is the use of the name Picton in street names and buildings throughout County Borough Bridgend, and it's an update report, and Nick Bunston is going to present that.
Thank you, Chair. This should be a fairly quick update for members who will recall that we brought our first report on the use of the name Picton to the last Cabinet Committee Equalities back a couple of months ago. So this is just an update to report to let you know where we're at so far. So the purpose of the report is to provide Cabinet Committee Equalities with information on the use of the name Picton in street names and buildings across Bridgend County Borough. And if I take you straight to 4.2, just to let members know that we, at the time of writing this report, we were currently working with organisations to establish capabilities to carry out the further research that was requested. we are now in a position where we have commissioned the work. Probably about 10 days or so ago, we confirmed with Past Lives Genealogy, Historical and Consultancy Services that we would use their service to carry out the research that we've asked for. So we are hoping to be able to bring an outline report really to the next meeting, which will include some timeframes and next steps, and then hopefully bring a full report to the Cabinet Committee, which will be in March. I am hoping that the report will be available before that, but that would be the next then committee that we would have in place to bring the full report. Going on to 4.3, just to update members that the Welsh Government audit that's taken place, they've now had 2 meetings, and their intention is to present the audit and accompanying narrative report to the First Minister at the end of October. So hopefully by the time we come back to the next Cabinet Committee Equalities, we'll also have that as an update to tell us on what Welsh Government steer we have. And then we talked last time about consultation. So just to confirm at 4.4 that Carmarthenshire County Borough Council have now started a public consultation, and 4.4 just gives you some detail there into what they've asked members of the public. And that consultation will have now just closed, so it would have closed last week. So again, it would be interesting to see what they find, because they have got the monument, the General Thomas Picton Monument in Carmarthen Town, so it'd be quite interesting to see what they've got from their public survey. Again, hopefully we'll be able to give you a little bit more detail on that at next Cabinet Committee. So that's probably it for the update this time. So the recommendation here is just the Cabinet considers the update report and awaits the further research from the historian, the update from Welsh Government before deciding on next steps.
Great, thank you, Nick. I can see that Councillor Baldwin's asked to ask a question. So would you like to come in, Councillor Baldwin?
Thank you, Chair. I've noticed the names of the streets, but and I know it isn't it's not one of Valleys to Coast or one of our properties, but we do have Picton Court as well in Nottage, which is Havard Housing Association. Yeah. And that is I noticed that's not on the list. I just wonder whether we've been speaking to them at all. Thank you. That's all, Chair.
I've spoken to Havard, and they've confirmed that they will be changing that name. So I guess it's just what they'll be doing. I can see that Councillor Young has indicated that he'd like to come in on the discussion. So would you like to come in, Councillor Young?
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. It's a question to Nicola, if I could. I'm aware that there are some street names and place names with Picton in the county of Bridgend that are actually associated with General Picton, who is the subject of so much, what can I say, talk with regard to his actions in the Caribbean and the slave trade. But there are a couple of street names here with Picton in the name, such as Picton Gardens and Picton Close. Now, I know, for instance, that those two were named after Richard Picton, who is or was living in Iwenny Priory. And I do accept the fact that he's probably a descendant of General Picton. But the reason why those streets were named after him in particular was because of his services to the community with regard to his work with CAB and the bench in Bridgend and magistrates, for which he was chair for a number of years. He was also chair of the Bridgend show. Now, I would suggest that those streets are named after an individual with no real connection to General Picton, other than the fact that he was a descendant, and the fact that those streets were named after him because of his own achievements within his own community. And I'm wondering whether on that basis they should actually be included in the list. Just a question. I don't know if you can answer that, Nicola.
Yeah, am I okay to come in, Chair? I think in relation to that, I think that's what we've asked the research to do, is to clarify for us which streets are linked to Turberville Picton, and which streets are directly linked to General Thomas Picton. So I think that is exactly it in terms of what we're hoping to get from the research, is that clarity on which streets are in relation to which people, and kind of the confirmation of that from a professional historian's perspective. I think the benefit that we have from past lives is she's also a genealogist, so obviously we've got the genealogy and historian perspective in terms of the family line as well.
Yes, thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think there are a number of people that have indicated to speak, so I will bring them in. But I think also we need to be mindful that it's not just about one individual, and it is about, what I think Councillor Baldwin made the point about Australia Terrace last meeting, and there's Hong Kong Terrace, and that's about, it could be about colonialism. So I think after this piece of work, there might be scope to do another piece of work around, some of the other questionable streets that there are in the county borough. I think Councillor James Radcliffe would like to come in on the discussion. So would you like to ask your question, please?
Yeah, I won't revisit the discussion we had last time. It was just a suggestion, really, that as well as looking into Picton, the researchers, or the authority generally, might like to identify positive people who've made a contribution to Bridgend, whether that was people who campaigned against the slave trade, people who campaigned for equality in the right to vote and so forth, and we compile a list of those people for naming future streets, whether those are streets in new developments or renaming the old streets or whatever, and we can turn this into a positive and celebrate the diversity of the history of people associated with Bridgend, and sort of move this towards a positive sort of thing about celebrating a different history, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense, and I think the conversation of renaming is probably something that we'd need to have at a later stage when we've decided, or when the historian has come back with what the connection is, and obviously that'll go in line with public consultation as well, which I think is reflected in the report. So I think probably a discussion for a future date, maybe. Councillor Smith has indicated that he'd like to join the discussion, so would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, sorry, just unmuting there. Yeah, just following on from what James has just said. I was very pleased to note, walking past the Grand Pavilion in Porthcawl the other day, that they've at last got an information board now on the external wall celebrating Paul Robeson's virtual concert there in 1957, I think it was, to the Miners' Eisteddfod. And I think that's one of the positive things we could be making more of. I think it really is a big deal for Porthcawl, actually, that Paul Robeson link. And hopefully that information board is just the start of something even more significant. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. So it was an update report. I haven't got anyone else that would like to come in on the discussion. It is obviously a quick report anyway. I think the more substantial information will be coming in November. So Councillor Howells would like to speak. Go on, Councillor Howells.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just going to say, of course, you've seen the situation in Bristol where they've changed the Colston Hall to the Bristol Beacon, and that is something that is a positive thing. That there's been a response there. But I've got, if you look at the list, there are 2 streets in my ward which are affected, and I think that we have to bear in mind the reaction of the people living in those areas if we're going to propose changing their names and all that. There are sort of issues around that, and we need to think at the end of the day, we want to make this a positive development. And the only question I would pose on this, if we start changing street names to another name, how will we be able to, in future, make sure that future generations are knowledgeable and that awareness that those have been changed? I'll give you an example which is something similar. It's like Nantafallon isn't its real name. It's Nantafarling. But you talk to the people in the area and ask them what Nantafallon isn't his real name. They look at you stupid. There was a name before then. It used to be called Tiwyth. People don't know these things. So if we change the names of these streets and that in the future, how are we going to ensure that future generations understand the context and the background of how it's happened? An example I was thinking about, and this isn't something I'm proposing, but if we end up in a situation we find that because of financial difficulties, we're unable, say, and costs to change the names of some of these streets and all that, shouldn't the Welsh government be looking at a Welsh equivalent of the blue plaque? We could have like a red plaque to put up there to explain something, the background, and say, that this is a terrible period. We need to think of options there, because we don't want to alienate people. We want to support what we are trying to do and get that message around. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Howells. I think there's quite a lot in there for us to unpack. So obviously we probably are running up against it for now, with a few more reports to go, but we will include those, I guess, or Nick will include those in the update November next month, and hopefully we can have a wider discussion then. So if no one else has got any comments or any further queries, can I ask for a Cabinet member to move the report, please?
Moved.
Thank you. Someone to second? Anybody?
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. And if you are not in favour, would you speak now? Great, okay. Thank you very much, everybody. And I know next month's going to be a very interesting discussion. So, great. I'll move on to item 7, which is the Equality Impact Assessments Annual Review. And I'll ask Nick to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the Equality Impact Assessment Annual Review for 2019-2020 is to update members on the Council's requirement to undertake equality impact assessments, to give an overview of the Council's approach to EIAs, and to outline the EIAs undertaken during that relevant period. So if I take you down to section 4.1, EIA overview. So the EIA is a tool to assess whether new or existing, or whether there are new policies, services or functions, or whether there are changes to policies, services or functions, or the removal of services, and whether any changes or new services would have a disproportionate impact on any members of our community, so any people with protected characteristics. So just to give you a little bit more detail there in terms of why sometimes you might get a report to Cabinet that wouldn't have an EIA with it. So I think it is important to understand, why we probably get quite a lot of reports and you don't see an equal amount of EIAs that follow. So it is to reinforce that when we're creating a new policy or making a significant change to a service or function, you would expect to see an equality impact assessment, at least screening, to accompany that report. And that would be detailed in the Cabinet report under equality impact assessment under that section. when you have a full equality impact assessment, you would expect that to accompany the report and be included as an appendix alongside that report. So here we are looking to see if by the creation of that policy, service or function, or the change of the policy, service or function, there would be a disproportionate impact on people with protected characteristics, what that impact might be and what mitigation you may then need to take in order to remove any disproportionate impact. So just some examples of reports that you may have seen recently in Cabinet where there hasn't been an EIA would be things like the local air quality management annual report, the annual flood investigation report. So where you've got an annual report where there's not a subsequent EIA that needs to accompany it, you would then get that report without one. And then just to give some examples where you would see or you would expect to see an EIA would be the development of the Strategic Equality Plan, Action Plan, so that had a full assessment that accompanied that report, and things like main consultations, so significant consultations, so the Learner Travel Policy Review, that report came to you in Cabinet with a full EIA. So that's just to try and give you a little bit more detail on when you should and shouldn't see an EIA and when to expect one. But it is really important to note that in all of our Cabinet Committee reports, there is a section on equality impact assessments. And in there, you should have some detail as to whether a full assessment has been carried out, whether a screening has been carried out, or whether there are no equality implications and therefore there's no assessment being done. So that should be explicit in that section. So I thought it was relevant to just give you that level of detail. So as well as the protected characteristics in each of our quality impact assessments, you would also expect to see impact on the Welsh language. So we reviewed the EIA back in about 2016 to include Welsh language, decided not to have a separate Welsh language assessment to include it within the EIA. And we will be reviewing the EIA later this year, ready for the implementation of the socio-economic duty in March 2021. So again, it'll become a much more robust document where we're considering the current protected characteristics, impact on Welsh language, and the impact on the socio-economic duty when making policy decisions. So the EIA admin process, taking you down to 4.7, we're also hoping to review that in the next kind of 6 to 12 months when we make the changes for socio-economic duty, and hoping to make the form an online form so that when EIAs get completed, they automatically come through to the Equalities team to have a look at them and to give any necessary feedback on the equality impact assessment, whether that be a screening or a full assessment. And again, that's important just to give services the relevant support when completing equality impact assessments and making decisions on consultation when carrying out impact assessments. So going down to 4.8 and training. We do have an e-learning module for EIAs, and in the period that we're looking at, 18 council employees completed that EIA training, which brings our figure to date to 225 people have completed the EIA training. And then taking you down to 4.10, so between February 19 and March 20, there were 8 full impact assessments completed and they accompanied Cabinet reports, and there were 68 EIAs screening, sorry. So just to give you some comparison to the year before, where we had 6 full EIAs and only 33 screenings, I think what we have seen over the last 12 months is a real improvement in the amount of screenings that are completed and the quality in some of those screenings that are completed that I see and get asked for advice on, which is really positive. And then full EIAs are completed from screenings within 6 months or before policy approval if the impact is assessed as high, within a year of screening if it's assessed as medium impact, and then within 3 years if it's assessed as low impact. You have as an appendix got a list, sorry, you've got 2 appendices. You've got a list of the full impact assessments that were carried out and a list of the screenings that were carried out. So you can see there the full detail of what's happened over the last 12 months. And the recommendation is that Cabinet Committee Equalities note the progress made over the last 12 months in the completion of the assessments, progress made with training, and our thoughts around the review of the administration process to support services. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. It was a very interesting report, and I'm glad that it's moving online, and so from an equalities perspective, you'd have more of an input and say as to whether or not things get screened out or not. So that's good, and also it's pleasing to see that the numbers of those carrying out screenings and those carrying out full impact assessments are going up. So that's also a good thing. I can see that Councillor Stuart Baldwin has indicated that he'd like to come in on the discussion. So would you like to ask a question, please, Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So just while I was listening to Nicola then, she'd mentioned about the fact that air pollution was decided not to have a full EIA on it, and I'm just wondering whether there's anything in the fact that because the air pollution levels could impact on people with disabilities and with breathing problems, whether we should have considered that an EIA should have been completed on the air pollution. That's the first one, but that's I thought of that just as Nick was speaking. It mentions that in the year 1920, 18 people had undertaken the EIA training, and that in total we had 225 people that had undertaken it. What would be the assessment of how many people we think should have had it? So if it's 18 within that year and 225 in total, sounds like a very high level, but if it's 225 out of, say, 1,000 people that we would expect to be able to have it, then it doesn't look as good. Whereas if that's 230 people, then we're doing absolutely fantastic. So I would just like to be able to understand that better. And does screened out mean that we've gone through a screening process and then excluded it from the full EIA? And I'd be interested to understand the level of training the people that have gone through. So if you've got somebody that perhaps hasn't completed that training and they're screening out topics for equality impact assessment, there obviously could be an issue on that one. It talks about 35 employees completed hate crime on page 73 of the Strategic Equality Plan. And I'd just like to know, is that low again? Or is it how many more we were expecting, and how we're measuring the e-learning and in relation to performance of staff? Obviously, while some of them are at home now, there could be an ideal opportunity for them to be able to pick up on some of those things. And again, on page 102 of that service, a strategic equality plan, it mentions Syrian refugees, and then other asylum seekers. And I appreciate that it's an older document, as we talked about earlier, but why only Syrian refugees? That's all. Sorry, Chair, it's quite a lot, and if Nick needs me to come back on them, then quite happy to.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, there were a number, so I don't know if Nick wants to go through them, and if there's anything that she's missed out, then once she's finished, feel free to pop back up and ask it.
Okay, so I think in relation to the training, we had 18 council employees complete during this year and a total of 225 so far. So the people that we would expect to get involved in the training are managers that would be carrying out equality impact assessments. And the year before last, we ran some face-to-face training with Red Shiny Apple, which was identified through training, was a needs assessment. So it was agreed that instead of just doing the EIA training online, we would actually do some face-to-face training. And I think off the top of my head, we identified about 60 to 65 managers that needed to do that training. And I think we had about 56 that actually attended. So the proportion that attended against those identified was quite good. So I think that figure looks fairly promising in the sense that we had 65 that were identified that needed that training. So I think 225 is okay, but that's probably something I could check with HR in terms of our proportion of managers and the proportion of people at that grade who have completed the training. Can you just remind me of what I think I missed the first question in terms of, I think I've missed what that question was.
That's okay, Nick. Yeah, it was, and that's great. If we've identified about 60, then and as it's growing, then I think that's just important for us as a committee to be able to understand where we're at and what we're achieving in relation to those. The other thing was around the air pollution one, and whether with that around that.
Sorry, I think that was just an example that I gave, and that was the air pollution annual report. So it's not that there hasn't been an EIA, it was just I was trying to find for you some examples where you might get a report to Cabinet or even to Cabinet Committee Equalities where an EIA might not accompany it. So that decision around Equalities and whether that's been screened out or whether it's had a full assessment, and I'm not sure. I could probably look in the appendices, but I'm not sure at what point that process started. So they may well have done an EIA, but their annual report wouldn't produce a new one. Okay. So I don't know if I was very clear on that, so my apologies, but where you've got an annual report or an annual update, you may not get a new EIA that accompanies that. So I was just trying to kind of demonstrate to you that you might have 17 or 18 agenda items at each Cabinet, but that number isn't then reflected in the amount of EIAs we see each year, because they wouldn't all warrant having a new EIA at each report stage.
The other question was around the screened out, I'm assuming, or I should say presume, I shouldn't assume, is the fact that somebody has looked at it and decided then that it doesn't need to go on to a full EIA. Yeah. But the question being is, the people that are deciding that, are there any within there that haven't undertaken the EIA training yet? Because I would worry that you've got people making decisions on screening out something that perhaps we could be missing, and there are, we should be looking at mitigating the impact of those and then leaving us as a local authority open to future attack.
Absolutely, really good point. I think we do get new people that may be carrying out EIA screenings that haven't had the training. It is really important that they do the training. But I think it's also really important that where there is any uncertainty, they come through to us and as Equalities team. And I am seeing more and more of those. So I've had several during our COVID-19 lockdown period that have come through to me as kind of we change and implement new services or make changes to services. So it's positive to see the amount that come through to me. But that is part of the reason that we want to move to a more online system. So that is an automatic process, so that there's a kind of a check process, because the screening documents, they don't become public documents, they just sit with the service. I think, we have got, I think it's ongoing, isn't it? Whenever you do any kind of assessment, it's ongoing, and we need to make sure that the quality is good, the assessment is good and robust, and people have taken all the evidence that they have into consideration. So the more training and support we can offer people to do that properly, people will then grow in their confidence when completing EIA screenings. I think that the fact that the numbers have gone up quite drastically this year is a real positive, that people are, completing more screenings. It'd be nice now to see those numbers of full EIA assessments where necessary start going up as well.
Yes, and totally agree with you. I think a more online system that would actually create the register, and a portal type system is fantastic. Yeah. And just because we're doing more screening, it doesn't necessarily mean that we will have more EIA for EIAs, and that's the whole process of understanding what we're going through. So I'm really appreciative of the work that's going on, Nick. On page 73 of the strategic plan, it talks about 35 employees have completed hate crime. And I think I saw earlier that we were about 3,600 employees within BCBC, and we've had 35 people complete the hate crime. And I'm just wondering, in my previous job, one of the things that part of the one-to-one and performance management of staff was the checking that people had completed online e-learning. And I'm just wondering about whether there's any way that we could increase that, because 35 seems particularly low, unless you're telling me that it's going to be mitigated in some other way.
Yeah, I think 35 is the number for that year. But do you want me to come on to the strategic equality plan bits when I go through that report, or do you want me to have a look at that now?
Oh, this was the appendix to this report, to the report we were talking about on EIAs, wasn't it?
No.
Oh, sorry. Have
No.
I skipped ahead?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, okay.
I can have a look at it now, but I just wondered if you wanted me to go through the SEP report first.
Sorry, I've skipped ahead. Sorry, ignore those questions.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so we'll come. So if you want to, after the next report, come back in with your questions that are relevant to that report, that'd be good. Councillor Howells has indicated that he'd like to speak, so if you'd like to come in and ask your questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 53 in relation to mental health, and I was wondering, has the council looked at, and does it provide any mental health first aid trainers to staff? Because clearly mental health is an issue that around the pandemic and lockdown, etc., there obviously is an increase. And, you know, is that something that's been looked at or is being developed? Thank you.
Are you looking at page 53?
Yes.
Because I think that's in the next report as well.
All right, apologies. Okay.
Okay, so on the Equalities Impact Assessment Annual Review, do we have any questions in relation to that report? It's item number 7. Okay, great. So what I'll do is ask for a Cabinet member to move the report, please.
Move.
Thank you. And someone to second?
Second.
Thank you very much. And I'll take silence as everyone's in agreement with the recommendations. Great.
Yeah.
Now we'll move on to item 8, which is the Strategic Equality Plan report and an update on the work undertaken by the directorates. Nick, would you like to present this report now, please?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this is the Strategic Equality Plan for 2016 to 2020 and the update on work that has been carried out over the last 12 months. So this is the 4th annual review for this plan, and it is the final review for this plan. So as you'll all be aware, we now have this new Strategic Equality Plan for 2020 to 2024, which was published online on the 1st of October. So if anyone hasn't had the opportunity to have a look at that already, it's there on our website available. So what will happen as a result of this work, there will be a final annual report that will be produced, and I think that gets reported to Cabinet Committee Equalities in March. So this is an outline of the work that has been carried out by services on each of the action plan objectives over the last 12 months. So just as a reminder, in 2016 to 2020, in that SEP, we had 7 equality objectives around transportation, fostering good relations and awareness raising, our role as an employer, mental health, children, leisure and art, leisure, arts and culture, and data. So taking you down to the updates, so straight to section 4. Key points to note for the last 12 months within transportation are we've had an increase in junctions that have been treated across the borough with dropped curbs, and that's really positive to see. We've had 112 junctions treated. We've carried out a mystery shopper exercise. Our enforcement team carried that out to look at driver behaviour and attitudes when carrying passengers in wheelchairs, and this is something that we've talked about both in this committee and in Bridgend Community Cohesion and Equality Forum, probably since I took up post a couple of years ago. So it's really good to see that mystery shopper exercise has been carried out, but also that the service intends to continue that to work with people who use wheelchairs to kind of test the system around taxi use across the town centre. So I have got a little bit more information on that, which may be useful just to give a quick update on. So the exercise took place on Thursday, the 27th of February 2020, between 4:30 and 6 p.m. The service did enlist the help of a person who used a wheelchair to carry out the mystery shopper exercise, and 3 test purchases were carried out. So the first was from Bridgend railway station to a nearby hotel. The report from the wheelchair user was that the driver didn't offer much help, didn't offer or say much with regard to help, but managed to put the whole wheelchair into the boot. A booking was also made by telephone for an accessible taxi, but the customer was advised that the driver concerned was not working on that day, so this was to a different taxi company. They sent a saloon car. Although the taxi arrived 10 minutes late, the driver was helpful in taking the chair apart and placing it in the boot, and then helped put the chair back together on arrival at Park Plaza Retail Park. And then the final trip was made by phone from Costa Coffee to Sarn railway station. Again, no accessible vehicle was available, so the customer asked for a saloon. The telephone operator on the phone said that the driver would do whatever was needed to support the person in and out of the car. And the customer reported that the driver arrived promptly and was very helpful. There were no instances in any of the 3 journeys around overcharging or incorrect setting of the meter. And the intention is now that the service will carry out those regular random reviews of our taxi provision across the town centre and across the county borough, alongside some service users. Over the next kind of 6 to 9 months, and I am hoping that the service will then bring a fuller report to this committee, maybe early next year, if members would like that, just because it is, something that we've talked about for quite a long time. And again, something that's really important is that operator telephone numbers now appear on the published list of wheelchair accessible vehicles. So that's for transportation. For fostering good relations, we've run regular hate crime awareness sessions across the county borough. We've carried out 82 sessions and engaged with over 1,800 people. We've carried out the hate crime awareness sessions over a range of places across the county borough. And we've promoted several campaigns in relation to equalities via our social media corporate sites, including Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and you can see a list there of things that we've promoted. We've continued to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, and in 2020 we held a public event which was Stand Together, and that was aimed to bring people together to speak out against oppression. And we've got some detail there around the work that's been carried out in schools and the comprehensive schools that Show Racism the Red Card are going into to deliver some hate crime projects. Again, I think we talked about that in the last meeting, but that's just one of the things that we've got as an update for this one. And over 4,900 employees have completed the training module against around violence against women, girls, domestic abuse and sexual violence. Under our role as employer, we've had 26 frontline staff attend the LGBTQI awareness training delivered by Stonewall in the last 12 months. Again, that's building on work that we'd already carried out. So back in 2018-19, we started offering LGBTQ training, when 113 people that year undertook training over 8 sessions. And subsequently from that, we've offered 2 training sessions every year initially to frontline staff, but we now have started opening that out, and anyone is able to apply for a place on that training. And if that's oversubscribed, we may look to their line managers in terms of the need for that training. But it is now promoted to all. We have got 2 sessions coming up in the near future. Obviously with COVID-19, they are now being delivered remotely, but that is something that we have committed to, as I say, since 2017-18, and something that we intend to continue to commit to. So the number of 26 may feel small, but it is something that we are continuing to build on year on year. As we've already said, we've had 18 people that have undertook the EIA training. We've got the Access to Work scheme, a huge range of resources now available to employees via the Employee Assistance Programme and Care First. And we've delivered additional resources to employees during the COVID-19 pandemic. In relation to mental health, this is our first year of working in a new partnership board. And there have been ongoing discussions about operational models and support to carers and families. We've seen extensive engagement and consultation with service users, families and stakeholders to develop and implement a new service model for carers. And we've made progress across social services and the MASH function in particular. Under children, going on to the point about Syrian refugees, I think that was made earlier. So we now have updates on the progression and wellbeing of families under the Syrian refugee programme, and regular engagement with the community leader at the local mosque. So that is Suleiman, that some of you may know, in the local mosque, kind of works with us much more closely now on integration of Syrian families as part of that congregation. And as we've already said, with children, we've undertaken Show Racism the Red Card training across our schools. With leisure, arts and culture, we may have covered some of this off in Andrew's section earlier, but there's significant development across a range of protected characteristics under leisure, arts and culture. So more joint working with Halo, Leisure and Bridgend Carers, more programmes in relation to active young people, and the Aging Well calendar was distributed in over 4,000 copies, went out for that. Under data, it's I think significant to say in 1920 we engaged with 18,000 residents across the county borough in a range of consultations. So that's gone up significantly over the last few years. Details of consultations, outcomes and next steps are now shared regularly on the closed consultation page of the website. Equality data is gathered for all new employees, and we continue to promote the self-serve system to all existing employees. Again, I think this goes back to the point we talked about earlier with Deb, that we recognise that a lot of our employees have been with us a long time and may have given us their Equalities information when they first started. Am I okay now? I don't know if it's just my voice going, I'm a bit croaky. Is that better?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, thank you. So I think we need to think about how we regularly remind people that Equalities data might change, their role as a carer might change. So it is important to us as a local authority when trying to make decisions and recommendations for our workforce or with our workforce, that we have a really good understanding of the protected characteristics of our workforce, with trying to continuously get that message across so that people update their data. And then again, just on the data point, I've got again the information in relation to the EIAs that were carried out, the fulls and the screenings. So there's a lot of work has gone on over the last 12 months, as has been with the last 4 years really of the lifetime of this of the last SEP. We hope now with the new SEP to again bring some of the information online, so people aren't having to be chased at the end of every year to give their updates, so that it becomes again a much more automatic process. So we're doing some work with that for the next 4 years. But I think to give some recognition of the amazing work that has happened over the last 4 years, the progress that we've made over the last 4 years, and hopefully we can carry that on through the lifetime of the next SEP. So the recommendation is that Cabinet Committee Equalities receives and considers this report and the appendix. The appendix is fairly lengthy because you have got there the full 4 years worth of updates. So I think it takes us through to page, let me check, page 138, so it is a fairly lengthy appendix, so people may not have looked at that in full, but it will give you a lot of detail about the excellent work that's been carried out by services over the last 4 years.
Great, thanks, Nick. I know that we previously had speakers on the other item that have questions in relation to this report. So if I could bring in Councillor Stuart Baldwin and then Councillor Gareth Howells, and then everybody else who'd like to speak on this item, if you could indicate in the box, I'll bring you in after they've both spoken. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you, Nick. The amount of work, as you've said, is absolutely amazing. And I was really pleased over the last 16 months in my role as the Mayor then to be involved in a lot of the stuff we've been doing on raising equality and making sure that it's forefront in people's minds. So you did touch on a lot of the stuff and obviously has covered it. It was just around the online the e-learning and whether we can actually increase that by building it into people's performance reviews or one-to-ones, and why. And because I noticed the amount of people that have actually had the training where they've sat down in maybe in a meeting room, but the amount of e-learning is limited, and just on why it's only Syrian refugees and not refugees.
I think the point about increasing the hate crime awareness training numbers is a really valid point. One of the things that I'm going to be looking at over the next kind of 6 months or so is a review of all of our e-learning modules, and I think what that brings is the opportunity to kind of put those out there and remind people of the training opportunities that they do have available to them. You know, we do have a really good suite of EIA learning opportunities for people. So I think it is, you know, trying to reinforce that that's there and giving people the time and opportunity to complete that e-learning. So I think trying to build that into performance reviews would be a really good idea. I think looking at the issue around Syrian refugees, it's probably just that's what's been, you know, put as an action over the last 4 years, but certainly something to go forward is that we can look at all refugees and how as a community and within community groups we support all refugees over the next 4 years of our new SEP.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nick. Councillor Howells, please, would you like to come in and ask your question? I think it was around mental health.
Yes, thanks, Chair. The question I wanted to ask is obviously, you know, around the mental health first aider training, because obviously the council has first aiders for sort of if people have an accident or something. But is there any sort of signposting? You know, you say there's training on some understanding, but are there any sort of mental health first aiders who staff could go to if they had an issue and they wanted to go and speak to? Because I think that is something important. I recently did a 4-day training course on it in my role, you know, dealing with hospital doctors because of the challenges with COVID. And I have to tell you, it was an eye-opener to find out the issues and how you could approach it, you know. And I think that's something that probably, you know, in the communities, we're going to have challenges and people in work under pressure because, you know, staff have been under enormous pressure the last 6 months. So I'm just conscious of the need that as an employer should be supporting people who've been placed in difficult positions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Howells. Nick?
In terms of the mental health first aider training, I'm not sure if it is something that we've carried out, so I probably need to check that with HR, but I think it's a really good point. And if it's not something that we have done or have any plans for, I think it's certainly something that we need to explore. So if you're happy, I can pick that up with HR and maybe bring that back to a later meeting.
That's lovely, yes. Thanks very much. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's an excellent idea. I think also Councillor Venables would like to come in on the discussion.
Hi, I might run out of battery, hold on. I just wanted to ask about on page 103, it says develop systems to monitor school bullying, and it talks about the SIMS module, and it talks about how the SIMS module is in use, but it hasn't been mandated for schools yet. So I don't know if Nick has the answer to that, but I just wondered why it wasn't happening in schools yet.
Again, that's probably one I'd need to take back to pick up with education to check.
Yeah.
I know we can get some information from SIMS, so it's whether maybe the whole system hasn't been rolled out and mandated, only certain elements of it have, but I would need to pick that up with education and come back to you on that one.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venables. I don't know if any other members would like to ask a question. I can't see that anyone's indicated in the box. I'll give you a couple of seconds. No? Okay. Well, thanks everyone for your contributions. And, you know, as Councillor Baldwin has pointed out, there has been a lot of work that's happened over the last reporting period. And, you know, it's just a welcome to see that. If we don't have any more queries or questions, obviously I'm mindful that we still have one more report to go. So could I ask for a Cabinet member to move the report, please?
Chair, happy to move the report. And Chair, can I give my apologies for the rest of the meeting? I've got a meeting now with the First Minister about care homes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Health and social care. Apologies. Thank you, Chair.
Happy to second the report, Chair.
Thank you, Rich. If anyone doesn't agree with the recommendations, could you let that be known now, please? I feel like a minister doing that. Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to item 9 now, which is the update report on the implementation of the Welsh language measures 2011 and the Welsh language standards. And over to you again, Nick, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this should be a fairly short report to go through, just to give you some key updates on progress since the last report, which was presented a couple of months ago. I think the only thing to note with this report is the last report that I presented was only up to March. So any updates here are over a slightly longer period, so probably like April to date for this report, rather than the normal 3-monthly report that comes through. So just to note, the purpose of this report is to update Cabinet Committee Equalities on the implementation of the Welsh Language Measure 2011 and Welsh Language Standards. To take you to 4.1, key updates have been provided each year since April 2000. Key updates have been provided to each Cabinet Committee since April 2016, and they are all referenced as background documents to this report. So taking you down to 4.1, key updates since the last report are that each year, so 4.1a, each year the Welsh Language Commissioner annually monitors the user experience. So people using our services as a council, including correspondence, telephone, website and reception services. This year, BCBC were part of the random sample of organisations selected to be monitored by the Commissioner's Office. Obviously, we didn't know it at the time, so it is a bit of a mystery shopper exercise. So we were selected to be monitored during 2019-20, and we received the results of that monitoring exercise on the 12th of August 2020. There were some issues that we needed to pick up as part of the findings, and we have now prepared a response to the Commissioner, and we have produced an action plan outlining relevant actions that we need to take to ensure compliance with the areas that were picked up. And just to give you some examples of the areas that we need to improve on, I think it's already been talked about as part of today's meeting, but on arrival at civic reception, there was no one to meet and greet in Welsh on 2 of the occasions that the Welsh Language Commissioner attended as a mystery shopper civic offices. Again, Deb has also talked about earlier the confusion over our job descriptions, and the Welsh Language Commissioner wasn't able to determine how posts had been assessed for desirable. So they could see on our job descriptions where it was highlighted as Welsh essential but not Welsh desirable, because I think we understand it because all of our posts are desirable, but from the Commissioner's perspective they found it confusing, hence the work that's going on around the Welsh language and recruitment. We had one form that was available on our website that didn't have on the bottom of it, this form is also available in Welsh, so we needed to pick that up. And on our website, the Welsh button didn't appear on one of the pages on our website. So there's some bits of work there that we need to pick up and work on between now and December. But again, I can give you some more detail on that in subsequent meetings. For 4.1b, on the 21st of August 2020, the Welsh Language Commissioner issued a statement to all local authorities, and the purpose of that statement was to share the findings of an investigation that had been carried out into Flintshire County Council, and it was reinforcing the need to ensure that there was compliance with the standards when arranging for third parties to provide services and activities on our behalf. So it wasn't specific to Bridgend, it was shared with all local authorities after an investigation around Flintshire Council to ensure that we were aware of the kind of necessary standards or the duty to comply. And then point C, BCBC were invited to and attended the launch of the Welsh Language Commissioner Assurance Report. So this was sent to officers with responsibility for Welsh language. Here the Commissioner held a short online event to present the findings of his annual assurance report for 2019-20. The assurance report was actually published on the day of the event, so there was no prior sight of the report until that launch event. So I intend to provide an update on the assurance report to the next Cabinet Committee, Equalities, later in the year, and if members would like, I can also attach that appendix report both in Welsh and English as an appendix to the report next time, if members would find that useful to see the full assurance report. Going on to complaints, we have had one new complaint which was received on the 14th of August 2020, and this was in relation to the new Gov Delivery emails that go out. So I'm not sure if members have seen the new Gov Delivery platform, but we now have a way of communicating with our residents in an electronic format, and people can sign up in either Welsh or English to regular email updates using Gov Delivery. And there were some errors in the text outlined in the report. We have gone back to the Commissioner in relation to those errors, identifying human error and identifying where there was an infographic used, and then the text in relation to it. The infographic had come from Welsh Government, and then we'd obviously used a translator to translate the text, and there was a slight difference in the wording. So we have gone back to the Commissioner in relation to that, waiting to hear if that is going to be taken on as a formal complaint. And then just to inform you on previous complaints, both the one around the voting card and the one around the electronic email about council tax, they have both now been concluded and closed. So the Commissioner decided not to carry out an investigation into the polling card one, because there was no requirement for the returning officer to comply with the statutory duties under the Welsh language requirements. And in relation to the council tax receipt, this has now been fully addressed, and the Commissioner has been reassured of the actions taken by both BCBC and the third parties involved in the management of the database systems, and all errors have now been corrected. So the recommendation is that Cabinet Committee Equalities receives and considers the report, and we will bring in another update report to the next meeting.
Thank you, Nick. And I can see there's a pattern evolving where we need to be communicating with our partner organisations that when they are working on our services that they need to be compliant with the Welsh language standards. I can see that Councillor Baldwin and Councillor Venables and Councillor Havels have all indicated they'd like to come in on this item. So Councillor Baldwin first, please.
Thank you, Chair. I take you to the it's page 142, and it's the new complaint. And I don't intend to try to discuss the first 2 points on the merit or quality of the Welsh, because I couldn't help with that. But the second 2 points which have been raised as a complaint, why is the Commissioner worrying himself around whether a VJ Day is linked to adoption with the use of an infographic as to a paragraph? So it's not really a Commissioner issue. If the Welsh is correct, it's just an issue with the fact that the photograph is with the wrong paragraph, but it's not really a Commissioner issue. And obviously the 2017 as a wrong date. There's nothing to say that the Welsh is incorrect, it's just the year that's incorrect. Can you is that the sort of response that we're going back to the Commissioner with, to say the fact that there's nothing wrong with the Welsh, we've just made a mistake on a photograph being with a paragraph and a wrong date?
Yeah, we have gone back to the Commissioner with that information. I think the issue has been raised because the information was right on the English version that went out, so the errors only existed on the Welsh version. So the complainant feels that the Welsh language has been, seen less favourably. So yeah, we have picked that up with the Commissioner. We have gone back to say there are some elements of human error. We accept that. So just waiting now to see what the next steps are with that.
So the date of 2017 was wrong was right on the English version, but wrong on the Welsh version.
I think so. Okay. Yeah, I think so. I know that there were several emails that came out around that. I think it was that they were the emails that were coming out about if your child was born in 2017, you were eligible for childcare. Right. And I think there was some confusion around some of the emails that came out and what subsequently went into Gov Delivery.
Okay, it's just obviously I totally accept the fact that Welsh as an equal language. I just worry about the fact that the Commissioner quibbling over the paragraph being with a wrong photograph seems to be taking the agenda in what I would think not to be the right direction.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baldwin. Councillor Venables has got a question.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to ask about in relation to the voting card. So although as a council we're not responsible and it's okay, do we know, is the returning officer actually going to update the voting card anyway? Thank you.
That's a good point. I think the leader may have actually come in on this last time to say that the voting card is something that is produced by us. I'm not sure if anyone else recalls that conversation, that the text on the voting card is actually prescribed. So that would be something that I would need to pick up and check.
I do believe that's what he said last time. But yeah, if you would, then we can obviously be firm on what we say. Councillor Howells, please.
Thanks, Chair. And I wanted to raise that point about the 41D there, and obviously, and just for Councillor Baldwin, Casgodi is basically would be shadowing, and Gwarchod would be protecting. So that's the context there, why the words there are different there. I think one of the things that my experience of sort of dealing with translation, because I used to do that sort of work, I think the problem is that I used to find that when you'd send stuff to external translators to have things translated, sometimes they would misunderstand the context of the translation. And I think that one of the things we need to do on this is to protect us going forward, is to make sure that someone is available to proofread these translations, because otherwise we're going to get into problems. You know, like the point about the 2017, you know, it may sound a trivial point, but these are the sort of complaints you'll have, you know, and I get these points made to me, and it is difficult. So, you know, we just need to make sure we've got someone to check up on it when these documents come back from the translator, that somebody can proofread and compare it, because the context and all that can change and cause confusion. But, you know, it's not a big deal, but we need to protect ourselves going forward and make sure we've got someone there who can check it. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Howell. Sorry, Nick, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to say, I do start my Welsh lessons next week, but I don't know if I'd be able to proofread documents just yet. But that is something that is actually built into the contracts when we commission translation services. We do expect that quality assurance to happen at that end. So when we work with our providers, it is built into the specification that it will be translated and then it will be checked prior to coming back to us.
But can I tell you, Nick, that from my experience, because we had external translators, because I didn't have the time to do a lot of documents, there were many that came back that I had to send back to them and correct or check with them, and they'd overlooked it. So, you know, we've just, you know, I'm just giving you a bit of you know, a bit of help and all that. Just be careful, because sometimes they're doing so many things, they don't proofread them properly, and the trouble is, if it's wrong, it's us as a council that get it in the neck.
Yeah.
We get criticised.
Absolutely.
When it's not our fault. But, you know, we need to make sure that, you know, to cover ourselves going forward, that's all, because it doesn't look good for people, and it's not our fault, but we are the ones who get the blame for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. I don't know if anyone else would like to come in on this item. Nope. Okay. So can I please get a Cabinet member to move the recommendations in the report?
I move.
Seconded.
Seconded, great. And I take it everyone's okay with that. If not, speak now. Great, thank you very much. Item 10 is urgent items. I haven't been informed of any urgent items, and I'm mindful that we are running over. So if there's nothing else, then I would like to draw this meeting to a close.